February 14th, 1929. In Chicago, the cold didn't cut. It sculpted. The late morning light entered low through 2122 North Clark Street and stopped in the suspended garage dust, as if hesitant to cross. It was St. Valentine's Day, Lover's Day, but inside, men smoked, spoke little, and watched the clock. Outside, tires crunched on the ice. In minutes, the city would learn a new synonym for silence. They were there because of a promise, a large shipment, cheap, clean, that could turn the tide of an old war. In Chicago, promises like that never arrive alone. They come with rumors, with nameless phone calls, with messages delivered at tables where no one asks twice. The first one to tell swore the load came from the South Side. The one who confirmed said it was from a neutral depot, respectable people. Neutral in February 1929 was an adjective as real as peace. In the South, in a sunny Florida house, Alphonse Capone played cards under domesticated palm trees. Distance was part of the choreography. His empire worked like a clock that doesn't like to be seen adjusting the time. If anyone asked, there were witnesses, laughter, sun, telephones many miles away from the garage on Clark Street. The men who swore by him knew that the theater had better scenes when the protagonist doesn't appear, and that the best roles sometimes are those of the police. The North had another name, another temperament, another courage: George Bugs Moran. Where Capone calculated, Moran provoked. Where Capone protected the stage, Moran turned on the spotlights. They didn't start this war. It came from afar, from flower shops where men fell among roses, from newspapers that told too much one week, and from wakes that made promises in the ears of the living. Chicago chose two gods and gave them an altar, prohibited alcohol. The rest was liturgy. In the Clark Street garage, 7 men, some from the hardcore, others orbiting closer out of necessity than faith, worn but clean suits, coats hanging like weary flags, the smell of oil, gasoline and anxiety mixed with tobacco. The mechanic checked tools. The brothers everyone feared when a collection was due avoided looking at their hands. A man with glasses, who liked to pretend he belonged to another world, tried to appear secure. Another, in a well-cut jacket, talked about money to give courage to his own face. Each carried in his pocket the reason for being there: debts, loyalties, ambitions, fear. The clock nailed to a pillar crept toward 10:30 when a car pulled up. Black, heavy, with the discreet arrogance of those who know the street. The door opened, and before any word, the garage recognized the hats, the overcoats, the firm chin of those who know how to command silence. And it recognized, above all, the uniforms. 2 uniformed men entered first, as if the law had decided to pay a surprise visit. Behind them, 2 more, civilians, with concrete shoulders. A third car parked like someone positioning a comma where the sentence needs a breath. There was the short instant when no one knew whether to give thanks or pray. In Chicago, the police appeared to interrupt, but they also appeared to escort. It depended on who paid the clock. "Line up," said one of the uniformed men, his voice dry like the metal he carried. The 7 obeyed as if the body understood orders before the mind. Hands up, faces to the wall. Embarrassed laughs died halfway. Someone tried to explain that there was nothing, that they were just waiting. The second uniformed man scanned the line like taking inventory. The mechanic waved his grease-stained hands, begging fate for permission. In the back of the garage, the light seemed to take a step back. "There's no need for trouble," said one of the civilians, adjusting his glove. The tone didn't ask, it authorized. That's when the first crack cut the air. It wasn't a shot. It was the signal, a word without sound agreed upon on another night, on the other side of the city, the invisible order that stitched the uniform to the intention, the badge to the hate. Then came the lightning of the machine guns, brief and long, with the obstinacy of those who intend to finish. They weren't nervous bursts, they were sequences, calculated cold, clean in their dirty purpose. The sound ricocheted off the ceiling, chewed concrete, tore coats, pierced breaths. The wall, obediently, received the impacts like signing a document. One fell onto the other's shoulder. The mechanic collapsed, still trying to cross his chest with his hands. The one with glasses had time to imagine an excuse that would serve no one. Two brothers, who had survived other mornings, realized too late that this was no fight. It was an execution. The smell of gunpowder and gasoline made an alliance that should never exist. One of the uniformed men approached with the calm of someone extinguishing a candle. The shotgun confirmed the ground's commitment to the bodies, and then, from an entire city, the noise vanished. The two policemen holstered their weapons. The civilians raised their hands like prisoners. They left in a procession, a scene rehearsed to the millimeter, the uniformed men simulating the escort, the other two feigning surrender. Outside, a neighbor saw the scene and kept in his eyes what he wouldn't dare to say for weeks. The garage door remained ajar. A thread of dust wandered over the light, undecided, as if asking to whom that silence belonged. Inside, something was still breathing. Frank, the one who always resisted, was agonizing on the floor. They said the real police arrived late, but they arrived. An agent knelt, leaned his ear close, and asked the question Chicago would repeat for decades. "Who shot you?" Frank looked up, and with the mouth that could no longer obey the truth said, "Nobody shot me." It wasn't courage. It was law. The law on the wrong side of the city. Die, but give no name. Die, but don't teach the path of vengeance to the enemy. The agent listened, nodded, stood up. The garage understood the size of that answer. On the other side of the map, under the Florida sun, Al Capone received a message. Perhaps it was a glance, a brief phone call, a newspaper dropped onto the table by a hand that knew how to land heavy news. Al must have smiled just so, opened his arms, and lamented for the city. He knew the price of silences and the usefulness of distances. A man who commands storms learns early to sit far from the rain. Chicago wouldn't know what to scream first. Horror, guilt, a name. The newspapers woke up hungry. They asked for blood and received 7 headlines. The photo of the bodies lined up against the wall became a mosaic in the country's retina. The mayor vociferated. The police chiefs promised. The preachers spoke of a plague. The neighborhood ladies locked doors that had always been ajar. Children heard for the first time their fathers pronounce Capone without lowering their voices. And yet no one would be convicted for it, because it wasn't a crime, it was a message, and messages in Chicago don't produce culprits. They produce silence. Witnesses didn't see, neighbors heard something. Telephones forgot who dialed. The name of the man who would have tied the loose ends, Machine Gun McGurn, appeared in gossip, vanished from reports, reappeared in bars where everyone knows everything, and precisely because of that, no one remembers anything. A young woman swore that morning McGurn was with her. Another confirmed. The alibi put on lipstick and went for a stroll. The investigations churned paper like ploughing stone. They frequented basements, offices, hospital corridors, and heard again the phrase the city adopts when it needs to live. I didn't see, I don't know. I wasn't there. A bag of silence is always larger than a bag of guilt. Meanwhile, the men who wore uniforms to kill and those who wore guilt to survive disappeared into the city's common choreography. A car that changes license plates, an address that changes hands, a name that was never a name. The massacre didn't win a war. It changed the map. Bugs Moran understood the lesson written with ammunition. No one was safe where they imagined they were. The garage, which had functioned as a myth and a routine, turned into a chapel. The North stumbled in its own blood, and where there was strength, caution was born. The South celebrated in silence, as if victory required prolonged mourning. The city demanded a fresh start. More police, more promises, more pronouncements. And, like every city that learns fast, it began to recognize a uniform with less innocence than the day before. Some say that's where the end of Capone began. Not because his hand pulled the trigger, the distance had been designed so no one could say that, but because that day he stopped being just the man who distributed soup to the poor and brought peace in forgotten neighborhoods. The massacre gave him a fixed shadow, a contour that neither charity, nor money, nor interviews would remove from his face. From that day on, the city began to look at itself in the mirror with another question. Until when? Capone played with what he knew: time. He continued to be the man of the public gesture, the controlled smile, the money that appears where the city needs to pretend nothing is money. He continued betting on the old rule: buy the right watches, calm the right men, pile up favors until they form ramparts. But the massacre had changed the music. The nocturnal symphony he masterfully conducted began to have new instruments, discreet, perfectly tuned, patient auditors. The entire country saw the photos of the seven. The entire country wanted culprits. When it didn't find them, it wanted order. And order has many uniforms. Some bear stars, others bear numbers. Agents began to follow trails that gunpowder doesn't erase: notes, checks, cars bought in no one's name, houses registered by ghosts, accounts that don't fit even when you close your eyes. The massacre turned on the lights that violence usually extinguishes. It showed the government that blood has another relative: accounting arrogance. But let's return to the day it all began, because this story belongs to the garage as much as it belongs to the courtroom. After the men left in procession, no one closed the door. Chicago was who entered. It entered the eyes of those who saw, the ears of those who heard, the hands of those who had to collect the remnants of a conversation interrupted by gunfire. The walls, for months, guarded the memory as walls guard the smell of dinner. People avoided crossing the street. Drivers began to slow down on that block. Children began to cross, looking not both ways, but at the wall. The entire city learned a new geography. Maps don't show everything. In bars, different stories had the same final point. The man who swore he saw the uniform also said he didn't see the face. The one who heard the bursts swore they were fewer than the newspapers said, and that a shotgun concluded what the world shouldn't have started. There were those who swore that one of the seven, before falling, tried to make the sign of the cross and got the side wrong. There were those who said the one with glasses apologized to a wall. The city was adding noises to the silence, like someone trying to make sense of the darkness by calling it night. Bugs Moran, when he found out, bit his cigarette until his gums bled. They said he almost went, that he was arriving, that he was delayed, that a street corner saved his life. In Chicago, the arithmetic of luck always needs details. He returned the message as men who don't know how to retreat return things. He threatened, he promised, he recalculated. The northern streets had shorter steps and longer eyes. Every time a siren sounded, someone remembered the garage. The massacre taught a liturgy to the living, to distrust what wears the law, and it taught power a choreography it already knew, to finish what it starts. The message wasn't just for the enemy. It was for the city, for journalists who had too much courage, for politicians who thought they could move between tables, for policemen who believed a uniform protects from everything. From then on, no one would enter a room with the tranquility that precedes the death of the innocent. And Al Capone, who watched it all from afar, learned another thing. The entire country was watching. What once seemed contained to Chicago became a national saga. Every gesture of his began to produce aftershocks. A donation became a photograph, an interview became an interrogation, a smile became evidence. The distance finally began to shorten, not because he moved closer, but because the country moved closer to him. The seven dead in the garage gave the government a legitimacy that morality alone doesn't offer. It was possible to tell the population, if we can't convict by bullets, we will convict by numbers. And numbers are not moved by the charisma of kings. They look in the mirror, they add up, they multiply, they deliver the name of the one who denies them. The massacre, which found no culprits, found a method. If you walk slowly down North Clark Street decades later, you'll see that everything looks ordinary. A building, a facade, a door. sometimes a plaque that tries to measure respect in metal. The ordinary is the clothes cities wear to hide the past. But if you stop and listen, you'll realize that certain streets have a different breath. That day doesn't end. It reenacts itself in low-voiced conversations, in steps that slow down, in hands that let go. Blood dries, silence turns into lime. And it is this silence that sticks to Capone's story. Not the silence of confessed guilt that he knew how to avoid. The silence of the entire city that saw but didn't tell. That understood, but didn't prove. That promised to remember, but preferred to live. Capone existed there as an idea that wears a suit, gives arms, and in the same gesture, authorizes, or is accused of authorizing, the darkest page of the notebook. Ideas don't go to trial, but they drag men to the dock. In the end, the St. Valentine's Day massacre wasn't a turning of the tables. It was the hand that trembled when the right card finally arrived. The city understood who was in charge. The country understood what it was up against. The government understood how it would fight. And Al Capone, who knew everything about how to command, began to learn what happens when the sum decides who falls. The wall remained. The photograph remained. The question remained, who shot you? Answered with the necessary lie to maintain a law that is not in any book. The certainty remained that on that February 14th, 2 uniforms entered that garage not to take men, but to take certainties. They took so many that even today there are those who light a cigarette on that street and without realizing it, look first at their hands as if checking if they still belong to a world where the uniform protects. The rest of the story you know in another form. Numbers, spreadsheets, cold rooms, heavy stamps, a name that loses its name and becomes a number on an island surrounded by water and rumors. But none of those scenes erase the original picture. 7 lined up against the wall, 4 men entering, 2 of law, 2 of night. 1 minute that lasted forever. The massacre doesn't answer questions. It multiplies them. And among them, the one that weighs the most is the one that never changes. How much does it cost to command? In the answer, Al Capone resides, not in the gesture, but in the method, not in the shot, but in the decision. And that is why, whenever someone speaks of Chicago, of 1929, of loves and of bullets, there will be a garage that opens and a procession that leaves, serious, composed, as if it had just fulfilled a duty. The duty to teach the city what it already knew and pretended to forget. On certain days, the law wears any clothes that get it inside, and when it enters, it doesn't ask, it commands.